Our fourth speaker today is Mr. Patrick O'Flynn, Chief Political Commentator for the Daily Express and Sunday Express. Would you please welcome Mr. Patrick O'Flynn?
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, courageous battlers against the Brussels Empire, and I note over on the right at least two brilliant British Boadiceas in the audience. I've got some alarming news for you. You're in acute danger of becoming fashionable. Over the last couple of years, certainly my paper has not led it, but it's picked up on it. There is a groundswell of opinion in this country that's turned against Brussels. I think we've always been a Eurosceptic nation, but I've certainly been struck from letters to my newspaper and just from conversations with people in all walks of life. We are now becoming an explicitly anti-European Union country, and our challenge is to bring that to the boil and time it and get it right, because we may be with referenda on Europe. It's been a long time since the last one, and when we get this one, it will be a long time to the one after. So it's one shot in the locker, and let's make sure we fire it right and get it right. Now, I'd like to pay a quick tribute to all the previous speakers, because being a journalist, I'm also something of a magpie. So from Ian, I will take that devastating statistical analysis and economic projection. From Dele, I was particularly struck by the phrase, the single political cage. I thought, I'm having that. That's too good to leave with him. And Mark, that we are more than a star on someone else's flag. So if you see those phrases cropping up, in future columns, you'll know I've done a Saif Gaddafi and been a bit of a plagiarizer. Now, I would like to regale you initially with a conversation I had with a perfectly nice chap, but a very pro-European journalist I'm friendly with on the Financial Times, who said to me, Patrick, you know, we share our sovereignty all the time. We pool sovereignty, it's in the national interest. Look at NATO, we pool sovereignty there. And I think I just grumpily said to him, well, NATO's a much more narrow issue and a narrow concept. But when I walked away from that, I thought, what I really should have said was NATO is like a neighbourhood watch scheme where all the neighbours in the street agree to band together against the local thugs and view an attack on one as an attack on all. The European Union is like giving the local busybody license to come into your house, see how many spoonfuls of sugar you have in your tea, what time your children go to bed, what lights you leave on in empty rooms, when your children get up in the morning, how many times you brush your teeth, and paying a king's ransom for doing so. So that's the difference between NATO and the European Union. Turning to the issue of the referendum, which is the thing we're all working for, it was Lord Pearson of Rannoch who first put me on to this being the aim and an achievable aim. And I must admit, initially, I was a bit sceptical. I pointed out to him, Nick Clegg, you may remember a few years ago, took over the Liberal Democrats when they had pledged a referendum on the Lisbon Treaty. He obviously worked out there wasn't a cat in hell's chance of the Lisbon Treaty being approved in a referendum by the British public. So as a diversionary measure, he promised an in-out referendum. Now, I don't believe he did that because he's a great Democrat. I think he did that because at the time he believed that was the one sort of referendum on the European Union that the federalists would be able to win. Now, I think since then ever such a lot has changed and opinion has shifted against the European Union, but it must remain the case that of all the possible issues to have referendums on about the European Union, the in or out one is the one that the other side has a credible chance of winning, and we must never forget that. But I have changed my mind as to whether that's the most likely result. I remember speaking to someone I admire greatly, who's an expert political campaigner, who'd done some work on this and said he believed now, just in the last couple of years, the balance has switched and that the no campaign would be a strong favourite. Now, that person is currently helping to run the No to AV campaign, so I will judge how he gets on May the 5th before assessing quite how much weight to give to that. But clearly, all the news in the last couple of years about the European Union has been bad news, has been expensive. As Ian's saying, it's a sort of sunset part of the world economy, not the sunrise part of the world economy. We on the Daily Express, we initially, as a lot of Fleet Street papers do, we grumbled and moaned about Europe, and we were a Eurosceptic paper. But I came to the view that that's a bit of a fraud, really. If you're not prepared to actually do anything about it, you can grumble about the rules of the club, but if you're in the club and you have no way of changing the rules, then that's not really a very honest position. And given the weight of the readers' views that had switched dramatically from being sceptical and in some senses hostile to the EU to becoming universally of the opinion, or almost universally of the opinion, that this is the worst day's work we ever did joining this outfit and it's time to get out. That led us to look at the case. Now, we always knew that the sovereignty aspects ran just one way. Very few British people, incredibly few Daily Express readers, are in their hearts pan-Europeans. That was not the reason. The key argument to win is the economic argument, which is why I'm so delighted today that both Ian and Mark have honed down the economic case so expertly, because ultimately, if someone's going to lose their job or if inward investment were to dry up, you would really observe that sovereignty is a bit of a rich man's plaything. But once the economics has come right as well, and we can show it's come right, then we're operating with the grain of people's sentiment and with their economic self-interest. And that is, I think, the way, the unity of those two things to help push the momentum to get the referendum and to win the referendum. Now, when we actually jumped into the deep end and did our front page that we were becoming an anti-EU paper, it was with a little bit of trepidation. But I have to say, we were absolutely overwhelmed with the response we got from the readership. I was looking the other day at party membership figures, and I believe when the Conservative Party, when David Cameron took over it, it had 290,000 members. Now it's estimated to have about 177,000 members. Labour is on 156,000, and I think the Liberal Democrats claim 58,000, though how quickly that figure is dropping, I'm not sure. But we got, in a couple of months, 373,000 coupons backing our crusade. That's as much as all the political party memberships of those three parties put together. And that shows the tidal wave of support that's out there. And I don't know whether you saw it, hopefully you did. We produced our special edition for getting out of the European Union as well, with great contributions on the economy from Ruth Lee, on the Commonwealth, which has been mentioned today a lot by Winston Mackenzie, who I can see in the audience. Hello, Winston. And also on the parallel issues about the European Court of Human Rights, prisoner votes, and all the unaccountable, ultra-liberal, pro-criminal measures that are being inflicted on Britain from there. And that has been an important component of this wider move of public opinion against the EU itself, I'm sure. But I spoke earlier about we mustn't take a win for granted if we get the referendum. And one of the reasons for that is that the anti-European movement still, or anti-European Union movement, I should say, still operates in a forbiddingly hostile media environment, where the absolute dominant media voice in Britain, the BBC, has just appointed Chris Patten, the former commissioner, as the chairman of its trust. And he is obviously on an EU pension, which leaves him honor bound not to do anything against the interests of the European Union. So a lot of pressure has to be applied to the BBC to get anything like fair play and a level playing field come the referendum. The other newspapers I note as well, while claiming to be Eurosceptic, they're very loath to give UKIP any coverage at all. And I noted the Barnsley by-election. You wouldn't have thought there'd been any shift to UKIP at all. The story was entirely presented as the Liberal Democrats melting down. The fact that UKIP actually beat the Conservatives into second place was almost unmentioned. I think what people have been struck by as well is that the European Union is restricting Britain's ability to govern itself on all kinds of policies that you wouldn't always immediately have to mind, from things like higher education reform, the duty to give the same package of taxpayer support to anyone from anywhere else in the European Union as to British students, has certainly constrained what ministers can do. And if you think of the area of welfare reform, the fact that we're trying to get some people who've been long-term unemployed into jobs while we've got a completely open labour market to dozens of other countries, with their young people can come over and maybe haven't had the problems of the welfare state and other issues. It's going to be incredibly difficult to reform Britain's welfare state and to get people off benefits and into work when employers have got this procession of young people coming over from Europe and willing to work for very cheap wages. So that's just another area. Now, the Conservative Party position at the moment is that they will work to repatriate sovereignty from Brussels, within Brussels, to make good that William Hague claim that you can be in Europe and not run by Europe. But I think that's been exposed as a fantasy. There's only one direction that sovereignty ever goes from, and that's from Britain to Brussels. And it's happening since the election, and it will continue to happen. And I think the sham of that very neat soundbite, in Europe but not run by Europe, that's been exposed, and that's a bit of a dead duck. So what can we do to keep the pressure up? Well, someone's mentioned the People's Pledge campaign, and then there's also the EU referendum campaign, and it's a shame, I think, that there are two parallel campaigns when there could be one doing precisely the same thing, which is trying to galvanise support in constituencies and get MPs to think about their prospects for re-election. I would love those two campaigns to come together, but in any event, they're perfectly both worthwhile supporting. And there'll be a long cranking up of pressure on MPs with majorities of 5,000 and 6,000 or less. I think we have some former parliamentarians in the room today, and they will probably confirm what's been my observation, that even MPs with very big majorities, they do start to worry about next time from at least 18 months out from a general election. And so if they see your name with lots of other people's names in that seat saying, I will only vote for a candidate next time who will deliver a referendum on the European Union, then that will weigh heavily on them. And I think if we all tell our friends and try and galvanise as many people, that's a real slow burner that will become more and more effective. The other looming chance is the next European parliamentary elections, which I believe 2014, so that's a way away too. But I think there's every prospect of, if the climate of opinion is sustained, and I believe it will be, of UKIP actually winning those elections. Now, that really would be a thunderbolt into the established political parties, because it would be a year before, just under a year before, the general election. And there's no way that story could be ignored by the other media outlets. So that will put pressure on. I'm also personally interested in the idea that last weekend we saw a big TUC march and rally through central London, which was unfortunately besmirched by a few hundred anarchists and thugs. Now, the anti-European Union movement doesn't have a fringe or a criminal fringe at all. There must be, maybe 2 years from now in the springtime, the prospect of us organising a massive demonstration from Middle Britain, from all corners of the United Kingdom. And I think you would find that far from smashing things up, it would be the sort of crowd that would tidy up any litter it found on the way. But I say, do not assume that victory would be ours, and let's hone the economic arguments as well as the sovereignty emotional arguments, and let's prepare a referendum campaign that cannot be pastiched as being Old Boys, Little Britain, Carlton Club or White's Club. Let's have the broadest range of people possible. There are many, many young people who've clued on to what the European Union means. Many people in the ethnic minorities too have clued on what it means. Let's get more women involved. Let's make it a real rainbow alliance of modern Britain. And I think as well, the fact is that could be useful is that we now have a multi-speed Europe. You have the Platinum Club class, which is Euro membership, calling themselves Euro Plus, sitting together to hatch even more federal plans. Then the next rung down is full membership, which is the grade that we're in at the moment. And then you obviously have the European Economic Area and EFTA. Now, if we could potentially present the decision as moving from full membership down a notch, which in fact means getting out, but if we could just put it in that broader context, it might not be so alarming to some of the floating voters who the other side will try to scare. I'll just leave that as a thought with you. Now, we must work on the Conservative Party. I believe at least 50% of the Conservative grassroots membership is now anti-EU, and I believe that were David Cameron, and alas this won't happen, but were he to stand up at the next Tory conference and say, you know what, I've got a new policy on the EU, it's to have a referendum on getting out, I think he would get a standing ovation. He would. But the other issue is let's work on the Labour Party too, because although they are overwhelmingly a pro-EU party, there are people in the pro-EU movement, I think of Keith Vaz, who seem to sincerely recognise the democratic deficit that has evolved since the mid-1970s. It's an awful long time of giving away sovereignty without the people's consent. And I think they're aware of the anger felt in Britain about that. And there will come a time, I am convinced, when Ed Miliband's lead in the opinion polls disappears, and he will need a rabbit to pull out of a hat to put the coalition on the defensive. And I believe were he to say, as a pro-EU person, I believe we must convince the people of our case, that would appear to be an honourable position, in touch with the people, a democratic position, and it would also have the effect of absolutely stuffing David Cameron and causing mayhem in the Tory ranks. That will become an enticing prospect to him if that opinion poll lead slips away, which I must admit, as a sort of analyst of political events, I think is highly likely. So it may prove to be that Labour is the first to buckle, and then the Liberal Democrats will have to remember what their official policy is, the in-out referendum. And then the Conservative rank and file will say, come on, Dave, we can't be the one party to turn this down. So I think there is every prospect of getting the parties to buckle on this, but it might not be in the order you would naturally expect. Now, I just want to give you another thought about the relationship of Britain to Brussels. I think Britain has become the abused partner, the battered wife of Brussels. And Brussels and the European elite tell us, whisper in our ear, you will never get by without us, you couldn't survive without us, undermining national self-confidence. And shamefully, it's the political elite whose confidence is most undermined, and they're most susceptible to that message. I don't believe the ordinary people are. Now, I noticed at Top of the Pops this week said they were going to revive the old programmes from the mid-1970s. And it all reminded me of one song from the 1970s, which was by a woman called Gloria Gaynor, and it was called I Will Survive. And I think this could be a bit of a message to Europe. First I was afraid, I was petrified, kept thinking I could never live without you by my side. But I spent so many nights thinking how you did me wrong. I grew strong. I learned how to carry on. So, ladies and gentlemen, we should tell the EU to go, walk out the door. Don't turn around now. Don't turn around now, because you're not welcome anymore. I'm convinced not only that Britain would survive outside the EU, but we would, as the phrase has it, be better off out. And I will help in any way I can this great crusade, and so will the Daily Express, which is, I'm glad to say, back once again where it belongs, fighting for an independent Britain. Thank you.
Now, Patrick, that was better than a pay rise. Listening to Patrick, I was reminded that timing is all important. About 4 or 5 years ago, the Sun spoke out against the EU. And Trevor Kavanagh wrote to me, and I've still got his letter, to say, oh, the circulation went down the next day. So it's about timing. And now the Daily Express recognises that the tide of opinion is strongly in favour of being out. And they are the people who will drive this forward.
If there's anybody here that doesn't buy the Daily and the Sunday Express, then get down your newsagent, order it. I'm not in their pocket, but they are leading. Without them, we wouldn't be so strong as we are becoming. And if we can turn other newspapers, the better. So all those that don't order the Express, get out there and get it.